Chapter 5. 3rd day of March, 1679. Over the next days and weeks I became known at Coral's household, and was often greeted on arrival by the children, whose faces showed less fear of losing their father as Father Time ushered death out of the door. Sometimes I brought them sweet cake, and they would run to sit by their father to eat it, whilst their mother and I dressed his wounds. 2 days after my first visit, I noted Coral had little more colour in his cheeks and was set to die. The holes in his legs did not heal, and so I insisted Mrs. Coral call on a surgeon to clean them properly. I could do no more than put salve on it and bandage it, and the rot was spreading. At first the good woman argued against me, but soon conceded she would lose her husband if something more were not done, and so agreed to send for someone. She would not have a surgeon, she said. A surgeon might tell the authorities, who might believe her husband was delivered home already dead, and they might not be happy to find he still lived. Finally, she allowed that perhaps the apothecary husband of my daughter, Rachel, by the name of Henry Blaisdell, might have more skill than I in medicine and would be acceptable. This decided, we sat and drank ale together. As fortune would have it, Henry was able to discover that the only way to properly clean a wound such as this was to wrap it with worms. This he did while explaining they would eat only the rotting flesh and leave the living. It was an effective treatment that I would never have thought of. Thinking of those 3 men, Green, Berry and Hill, tried for the murder of the magistrate Sir Edmund Berry Godfrey, I thought how it was surely a shame that there were no such creatures that could do the same for London and rid the city of rot, leaving only the good. There was not a whit of proof against these men that stood the test of court, yet still they were hanged. 3 weeks later, Francis felt well enough to talk a little. I did not expect him to say much about his ordeals in that dark and icy cell. He started by saying he was indebted to me for saving him and for my loyalty. Later, when he recovered more, he told me things that I wanted to know. I asked about the holes in his legs, and he described heavy irons called shears that were so far apart that they made it impossible to walk. I could scarce move but a few inches, and that took all of my strength, he whispered a little louder than first day he spoke. My legs were shackled by irons, weighing 40 full pounds or more, though the limit of the law is half that. They tried to have him confess to carrying the body of Sir Godfrey away after his murder, and the more he denied all knowledge of it, the more they beat him and pulled his hair. They threatened to run him through with a sword, then put him in a thing like an animal trough where he was cruelly bolted in and squeezed until he fainted. Not only did the jailers overlook his torment, but a minister added to it. Then, when they could not make me own what I did not do, they offered me a large sum of money. £500, they told me, to name the one they employed to move the poor man's body. I would not do it. I would not belie another for my own gain. Nay, I must live with myself or die. I nodded agreement. I had a growing respect for this man. When they discovered I was no dog to be trained to do their tricks, they chained me in the cell like a wild beast, so I could not move more than a yard in any direction. I was left to die without food or drink. How did you survive so long? I could not fathom the horror of it all. Perhaps every day I met the men that did this, that did not have a soul, but I did not know what such a man looked like. Coral looked away to the children and blinked a few times before turning his head back and saying in a low voice I could barely hear, I was forced to sip my own water to wet my mouth for want of any other drink. The only time I saw victuals were when my brave wife dared bring me some. The milk cast on the floor soured out of reach, and the keeper made me watch him eat my bread. Wicked, 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 wicked. How is it that one in the devil's service lives on this earth and not where flames sear his beard? It is not only those in prison that are bad. There are some in high places and some in low. I cannot tell who they are, that would point a finger at any that they would have taken down. Tortured until you confess, then tortured more to accuse others, so they also confess. I say 'tis a witch hunt, I said. Aye, that's exactly what it is, agreed Coral. Only this time there is no line drawn between men and women. All are equal marks for the jail. As I sat there, I was overcome by the size of this. It was bigger than him, bigger than me, and bigger than each and any part of the whole could do a thing about. There was little for a person to do but keep his head low and watch it play out. But so many innocents would die before it did, and so many had already done. But why should I only discover the truth of it? I put it to Mr. and Mrs. Coral. What if I could petition the king and ask him to look at his jails? What if I could tell those that can stop it? They could demand proof, and I could give it to them. Warmth grew in me as I told Coral and his wife my idea of why I desired to collect all the details of this awful time. I became excited by the difference I might make. And what if every man and woman on the streets and in all the coffee houses were told what happened in those places? Could that not make a difference? To discover it, they only had to go to the jails and see for themselves, or attend the courts and hear for themselves. Sitting next to this man, broken by the law of the land that should protect him, gave me strength to stand up for the truth. Will you let me tell you a story of what happened to you in the cells, what they did to you? What do you mean? He said warily. I must tell the truth to all people. If they know, I am certain they will stop it. And maybe they would use it against you, and you will find yourself in my stead. I raised my head and said, I am a respected citizen. They will not harm me. They would throw into jail any that would stand in their way. Do not believe that they would not have you as well as any man, because they would. It may be so, I thought about it, but I must try. And I must protest. You have done so much for me. I would not see you put your very life in danger like this. Despite his words, I saw hope in his eyes. He wanted people to know what happened to him. If his story was not told, he would merely be another silent, tortured soul amongst many, and his story would be of interest to the rest of London. They would not care unless they understood it was innocent folk such as themselves that were in jail and hanged for acts that they did not commit. Only then might this atrocity be stopped. I will do it. People must know. His wife piped in. I have been in the city, Mrs. Cellier. I know what they say about the one called the Popish Midwife. If you do this, it would be all the reason they would need to hang you from the rafters or rip you limb from limb if they had half a chance. You must not give them that chance. Stay low and live quietly, is what I say. I have lived my life persecuted for my beliefs, Mrs. Coral, for my parents being Protestant royalists when I was a child, and for being Catholic now. There need be no reason than my living to find cause against me, but living should not be my reason to hide my beliefs or my truth, or the truth. If I do not stand up and speak out, they will only find another reason to persecute me. I may as well stand. I did not know you were a turncoat. How did you come to the Roman Catholic faith? 'Tis a story too long to tell at this time. I have a woman heavy with twins I must visit, I said, as I stood, not wanting to think of my young days. I told her I would call before dark. I thanked the Corals for their hospitality and bade them goodbye. Before I closed the door on the way out, I turned back to Mr. Coral and asked him if he could write an account of his ordeal. He told me he did not know how to write, so I said I would come and be his scribe if that was satisfactory to him. At his agreement, I nodded my approval and left. Walking home, I pondered on the rightness of doing a thing so provoking. Our Almighty Father had brought me in the way of this cause, and it was not my place to question my place in it, only to divine what I should do about it. It was right that a person knowing something wrong should speak out, but I had children and a husband I might put at risk by doing so. The ones that had the reins of this land shown over and over they did not care about such things. They deprived prisoners of seeing their spouse or parent or child without compunction. It was true my family had need of me, but was their need more than those poor wretches in jail, separated from their own families and tortured in body and mind until they could stand their life no longer? My knowledge of this atrocity made it my duty to make something of it. I had an urge to see Pierre. I fondly pictured his face yesterday after we had bid good night to the boys from St. Omer, the witnesses brought over for the trials at the Duchess of York's bidding and staying with us. I could not deny the pleasure as he spoke of his home country. Still wanting me to return to France with him, he told me stories of his childhood and of how he came to be such a fine merchant. At times such as these, he reminded me he was not always the old man he had now become. He was once a strong man with a thriving business, and I loved to listen to his joyful tales of youth so different from my own. As he spoke, the flickering of light of the fire could not match the warmth memories lit his face, and I happily borrowed them and made them part of mine. I would take counsel with Pierre when I came home. He was a wise man, and he would know whether it was right or not I should do as I intended. Chapter 6, 28th day of March, 1679. "Will I ever carry again?" asked Lady Cholmondeley, trying to see what I did. I held firm my thoughts and gently swabbed her female secrets with the oil of early summer garden tansy, then wiped down my hands with some rags I had in my bag for that purpose. The likes of this work brought to mind that done on poor Mrs. Potter a year ago. The gentry were no more safe from inept practice than the poor. "The Lord does not take me into his counsel, my lady. If I ever discover the answer, you will surely know of it. But until then, we can but pray." "I see. I did imagine it was that bad," she said. I knew her understanding was full. Changing the subject, I said, "How does your wet nurse seem to you? Is she suitable?" Having nursed all my own infants, I normally disapproved of the common practice in the higher classes taking a wet nurse without reason, but sometimes necessity demanded it. This mother was still too weak to feed her own, having suffered greatly during the birthing. "I believe she does a fine job, but I fear the infant is ailing." "Oh?" I asked. "In what way?" "Marianne says she has a digestive trouble." "Does the infant yet eat meat?" I asked. Perhaps the nurse had not followed my instructions on what victuals the infant ought to have. I thought of the meal that was being prepared for my family and our guests at home, and a groan echoed throughout my empty belly. I did not break the night's fast when I woke, being fearful for Father Lewis on trial this day for his life. Word was that some malicious persons in Newgate spoke out against him, and if it were to be proved he practised as a priest, he would surely be hanged for treason, as was the law. "She does. I watched her prepare wheatgrass bread soaked overnight and boiled in a little milk as you instructed. Has she eaten any other thing? I asked. I believe the nurse follows your instructions implicitly, she said with little enthusiasm. I will talk to her on the way out. Perhaps it's herself that she does not care for. Payment for service was left in the usual place for me to collect as I left, so I wished Lady Cholmondeley well and went looking for Marianne. I found her on her own in the nursery holding a sleeping babe. I had mind to be quick here, so I would return home and have news from Master Townley, who this morning had plans to attend the trial at the King's Bench. Good morning, Marianne. How fare you today? I understand the infant is ailing. It is not much, Mrs. Cellier, but a little looseness. I see. Have you any soiled clothing I may see? Marianne looked around the room, then pointed to a few items at the cot side that had not yet been washed. I went over and picked them up. The colour is wrong. Are you unhappy? No, ma'am, I am not. Have you eaten any such thing I instructed you not to? No, I have done as you said. What about your husband? Have you laid with him lately? You mean in the intimate way? I do. No, ma'am. You told me I must not, and so I have not. I would not do such a thing to forfeit this job you found me. Nor would I ever do anything that would harm the infant. I must inspect you. Another time, and any woman of breeding might have been shy to show herself, but Marianne had been opening and closing her upper garments for over a year, suckling first her own infant and now Lady Cholmondeley's, and was used to me checking all worked as it should. She faced me with her top open, and I saw she was full and well-shaped. I walked over and took one protruding nipple between forefinger and thumb and squeezed until a few drops of milk trickled out and caught them on my nail. Your whey is too thin. I believe there is rhubarb in your garden. Eat some cooked for breakfast for 3 days and you will find the little one happier. I looked at the young woman. A wet nurse was at her best after the second child. This one was on her third, but she was healthy and robust, and I knew her brats well. She tended them lovingly as a gardener cared for his flower beds, and they grew strong. I give you thanks, Mrs. Cellier. I will do that, she said with respect. I took my leave of her then and walked home fast. Momentarily, shining silver veins flashed beneath the dark cloud, and then there was a long, low rumble. A storm approached. By the time I had reached home, I was drenched. I handed our housekeeper, Susan, my dripping cloak to hang in the closet to dry, and in the absence of Anne, my maid, instructed her to join me in the bedchamber to help me dress for dinner. Before she left, I asked her if Peter was already laid to sleep. Yes, madame, she bobbed. The babe called himself to sleep. With that, she was gone, and I went to my room. My clinking bag of medicines and ointments seemed heavier than usual today. I dropped it on the bed and opened the large carved oak wardrobe doors. A loud crackle of thunder came fast on the heels of the blue light that filled my room and called to attention the ravages of my full 50 years in the looking-glass over the fireplace. It passed so quickly as it came, though the impression in my mind did not, even when I tried to shake it away. I chose an evening dress suitable for company and struggled free from the wet fabric that clung fast to my cold skin. As I turned to drop my wet clothes onto the bed, I fair jumped in fright. I did not see my youngest daughter enter. She stood by my bag, fiddling with the leather handles. "Hello, Maggie. What have you done today?" "Only playing. What is this?" Having undone the catch of my bag, my child of 4 years proceeded to pick out items one at a time and inspect them. I could not wait longer for Susan, struggling to squeeze my arms into the tight sleeves of the spring blue evening dress I had chosen. My eyes finally emerged from the lace-rimmed neck to see Maggie holding in one hand the bulging purse of soft brown kid leather I always carried with me. She opened the string tying the top, and from it took a plain white egg-shaped stone and held it in the air between finger and thumb to inspect it. "That is called an eagle stone, dearest. From Africa, fetched out from beneath a nesting eagle." I came and leaned over her to look at the stone she held in her hand. "It is special. There are others in there from different places. Shake it." She shook it and was surprised to hear the rattle. "It carries an infant in its belly," I told her as she puzzled over it. "A small stone within the larger stone." "Will you birth it?" "No, but hung round the neck of the woman with child, it will protect her from miscarrying and keep her safe." "What is this one?" She took another leather purse bound with threads from my bag and opened it. "Lodestones. They have power the unborn child cannot resist. Sometimes an infant is too comfortable and does not want to leave the mother's womb, so I show it the stone to change its mind. It is drawn to it, see?" From the bag, Maggie then took one of the grey, noduled stones, speckled with red iron, and placed it onto her upturned curved palm, studied it, then held it to her cheek. I did not expect what next she said. "I would not leave your belly for this. So ugly." I held out my hand for the stone and also studied it, though I had seen it, or one the like of it, since the day I followed my mother from house to house, dreaming I would one day follow in her footsteps. Seeing it through my daughter's eyes, it did indeed look plain. "Do you wish to see some power of the stone?" Maggie nodded, staring at it as though it would grow wings and fly like a bird. I went to my bedside and opened my wicker sewing box, lined with red silk, and drew forth the fine needle I had last night used to fix an indignant button Pierre's new-grown girth caused to jump from a shirt that was happier in his younger days. "Give it to me," I said, holding out my hand. Maggie placed the innocuous-looking stone on my flat palm. "Here." I indicated to her to follow. I cleaned a space on the dressing table and put the stone on its surface. Then I placed the needle nearby. Nothing happened. I rolled it gently closer. Not much, only enough. Suddenly the tip took a life of its own and spun around to touch the stone. Maggie's mouth hung open, her eyes wide. Then she exclaimed, "Such magic!" "Nay, Maggie, a midwife does not cast spells. We need no magic to care for mother and child, but nature's own garden, herbs and spices for ointments, medicines and poultices, and stones such as these to assist us in our work or ward off bad happenings. The Lord Garden holds all we need for our work. We do not borrow the devil's hand." But this is magic. Are you a witch?" "This is nature, child, a midwife's instrument. I'm not a witch, and I'll thank you never to say such things again. Those of our craft are often tasked to expose witches and give evidence at the town's council of our findings." "Do you use this lodestone to discover them?" "Lodestone," I corrected. "No, our privilege to visit a woman's bedchamber gives us this position." Susan came in then, and I asked her to fasten my dress, turning my back so that she might do so. And also the trust and respect a good wife gains for herself, I added to Maggie, speaking over my shoulder. And between us in this room, I am not certain any woman has that kind of power, only the Lord. Do the men from Flanders come to find a witch? Though I might oft call it a witch hunt, for it surely is that indeed. Nay, these young men come overseas to save the lives of their friends. Are they witches, the ones that come to save? Impressed as she was by the stone, she could not seem to let go of the idea of magic. They are some of our faith, and for that they are condemned to jail. Their only crime was to befriend a snake, to take him in and care for him, and for that they are accused by him of ungodly things, even knowing them to be untrue. What did the snake say? Was it the snake in the Bible, the one that spoke to Eve? You should ready yourself for supper, if this was not for a young child's ears. But, ma'am, was it? Was it the same snake? A different snake, the same forked tongue. He accused them of trying to kill the king, though his proof is imaginary. I spoke my thoughts out loud, but as usual I spoke too openly. Enough now. Go ready yourself for supper, Maggie. Yes, ma'am. Maggie looked at the lodestone again. She raised her fingers and went to touch the needle, but some distance from it withdrew her finger as if it were burnt. It will not hurt you, Maggie. It holds only good spirits. But, ma'am, why did Master Palmer cry? Did his friends die? The question took me aback. I had thought she would ask further about the stone. Did he cry? I asked Susan. At her nod, I pursed my lips. That did not bode well for news of Father Lewis. I must raise the spirits of these young men. If they stood in court with heavy heart, it was sure to be read as guilt or desperation to save their friends. Their testimony would be thrown out. It was how the mind of the accusers worked. The boys must be confident in their testament, not fearful of failure, though failure was the most common outcome these days. I will talk to him, I said more to myself than any other. Go now, Maggie, or you will have no supper. Maggie skipped out fast at that. Why did Master Palmer cry, Susan? I know not, Madame Cellier. I did not ask him. Perhaps we shall find out soon enough. Susan nodded. 'Tis dangerous to talk of Mr. Oates so openly. You should be more careful. Then suddenly remembering, said, There is a message from my lady, the Duchess of York, madam. What? Where is it? I should admonish Susan for her impertinence in chiding me, but she was right. She fetched the letter from beside my bag on the bed, where she must have laid it down when she fastened my dress. Here it is, Madame Cellier. A messenger delivered it this afternoon. I took the letter eagerly. Any message from the royal court was cause for excitement. To be singled out by the king's sister-in-law was a great distinction. Thank you, Susan. That will be all. She did not hide her disappointment as she left. I took a thick blue woolen shawl that matched my dress from the top drawer of the curved front walnut chest and drew it close around my shoulders. But it was not the chill evening air that caused me to shiver. My mind had returned to Father Lewis and all those cooped up in jail for no other reason but the lies of that evil man, Mr. Oates, and his cronies. How many more were to suffer from this dark man's work I could not know, but plenty with his belief would readily point their finger at any priest that dared to take communion. The Welsh priest was on trial for no more than being saviour to the poor and holding mass for his congregation. Squinting my eyes so I might better see the words in the firelight, I read the instruction to come to St. James's Palace in the morning. Perhaps the Duchess had discovered I tended her husband's first wife and would ask me to tend her also, for fortune did not smile on her childbearing. I held the letter to my chest in momentary pleasure that I might have been singled out for such honour. I would have Margaret lay out a dress for the occasion. A short while later, I had to hold my news close as we sat at the table to eat. I wished to tell my husband of it first. Before we could begin, the bell to the outside door rang. My family were used to the harsh sound, but the young masters from St. Omer that did not live there winced. I made note to have the blacksmith fix that broken bell casing. He had twice promised to do so, and twice he had failed to do so. If it weren't for the that the man was in need of work to support his large family, we would take our business elsewhere. We waited to see who had come before we said grace. We did not have long to wait. Very soon the door to the dining room was opened by one of the boys from St. Omer, with Susan following close behind. "Come, Master Towney, come forth and dry yourself. Tell us the news while we eat," said Pierre to the dripping youth silhouetted in the doorway. A gust of damp air reached the table from the hall, accentuating the cool spring rain splashing against the window. "My news may remove your appetite." "Then we will eat first, talk after. We have had little enough appetite today as it is," I said, needing food in my belly. "What? Are our manners hiding along with our good humour? Susan, be so good as to take our young friend's cloak," said Pierre. Patiently we waited while Susan took the wet cloak from Townley's shoulders, deftly folding it 3 times to cross the hall and hang it in the closet without, I suspected, a single drop wetting the floor. Townley trod heavily on the stone floor to the empty place laid for him, and leaned on the back of the chair for support, catching neither the eyes of the other young French visitors nor mine, nor Pierre's. "A wet evening, my friend," stated my husband unnecessarily. Townley paused before sighing. "The weather is rougher out there than you dare imagine." His tone said he talked of other than the weather. He blinked twice, then wiped the drops from his lashes. "Where is the storm centred?" I asked. He looked to me then and answered, "The King's Bench has its eye." "Seat yourself, friend, and eat, friend. Let us all eat." The young Jesuit needed no further invitation to sit, and when he sat heavily. "Your dish, Master Palmer." I took the offered bowl from the young man and filled it and returned it to his outstretched hands, noticing his eyes did indeed show the mark of earlier tears. Had he heard Master Townley's news already? I did the same for Master Cox and Master Fool. One by one I filled each dish around the large table. Margaret, who had cooked tonight, had allowed plenty to go round. My husband nodded as I gave him back his bowl, and Isabel, my unwed daughter from my first husband, questioned me with her large eyes. I shook my head. It was not yet time to hear the news. "Maggie, perhaps you will say grace this evening." I hoped the naivety of young Maggie's innocent prayer might lighten the mood but a little. Besides, I suspected that none other felt very much like talking. As I thought she might, Maggie threw herself into the task with enthusiasm. "We thank you, God, for the blessing of this food we eat. We thank you, God, for giving us plenty to share with our friends from over the seas that are not friends of witches nor snakes. Please, God, may it taste like it smells," she declared. When the prayer was said, nobody ate. There were no sounds of the picking up of cutlery, or metal on plates, or of chewing, nothing. I opened my eyes and saw every person without exception looking at young Townley with expectation. His eyes stayed closed, and he leaned his head on his tightly clasped hands. None was prepared to take a mouthful while he moved his lips in noiseless prayer. There was no doubt his heart was heavy. I dared not ask him to reveal the cause of such weight, for I knew the reason must indeed be as we feared this morning, as we feared each and every time a Catholic was taken to trial. The proof was weak against the good and kind Father Lewis, the Welsh Jesuit, also known as Father of the Poor to members of his parish, but whose real name was Father Baker. How he had been imprisoned this last 4 months with no evidence against him except the word of a couple of common villains. Truth must win over lies. The purity of witnesses speaking before God, sworn on his word, must surely defeat the word of a viper hissing sham tales in the court garden. When at last the youngster opened his eyes, his lashes were wet with tears that did not fall, by which time we were all similarly afflicted. His eyes stared unseeing towards the jug of ale. Instinctively, I took the handle to pour some for our guests. Broken from his morose reverie, he shook his head and looked around the table, and seeing where he was, came back from that dark place. "Come, gentlemen," I tried. "Let us eat this food provided by the generous Lord Castlemaine. We will bear the news better with our bellies full. 'Tis no reflection on the hardships we bear that we eat to keep us strong." We soaked morsels of bread in gravy to wet parched throats, but thoughts of the day's deeds still yet made them hard to swallow. Not a word was spoken. "Did your day's work go well, Lizzie?" Pierre was uncomfortable with the silence. This was not the way we were wont to pass supper, even on the worst of days. Outside our home there were many ways of beating us down, but here we had each other, and in that way stayed strong. I found this dollar no less hard than my husband did. "A day as any other," I answered, keeping my eye on his face and ignoring the downturned ones around the table. If any words could silence us again, it was those words. A day as any other could only mean more sore news. "Now, tell us, Master Townley, for our stomachs are full, but cannot take this waiting longer. What news from the priest's trial?" My husband broke the ban on the topic once we had eaten. "He has been brought to Newgate for examination by Oates and his kindred tormentors," said Townley. "Is he free now? Have they finished with him?" Pierre knew the answer before asking. We all did. It was the reason the mood was so low. But we all needed a dam of hope to shore up the river of relentless persecutions. Even one Catholic to be believed and released would give us new strength. But the wicked current was always stronger, and the dam was close to collapsing. The case of Father Lewis was strong in his favour. He had good witnesses to prove his character and the truth of his innocence, and if any person might be set free, it would be him. His trial had become symbolic of our cause. What happened to him might be the fate of any one of us. "His freedom now lies in release from mortal bounds," said Townley, resting his forehead on the balls of his fist, elbows on table. Talking down at the table, his fingers grasped the roots of his hair. "He was found guilty of being a priest, and so of treason. He will be executed as a traitor." He was equally angry and perplexed, and more than a little bitter. "And we all know the death of such a monster betrayer. He will hang until nearly dead," Townley said strangely flat. "But not quite. Zounds, no. He will be snatched at the last minute from peace, sliced open. His entrails will be cut from his belly and burned before him. Oh, to be sure he realises the wrong he has done, and he will die knowing his body is to be cut into four by the hangman, and his quarters shown in the four corners of the town. This was the required death for treason, so he told us nothing new, but the bitterness in his voice contradicted the demeanour of hopelessness. His anger was something I had not heard before in one so young. All this trouble for one harmless good Samaritan. Townley stopped speaking and looked up to stare somewhere at the far end of the room and beyond, then finished. God only knows what they would do to a real traitor. What is this place, that it counts a priest as a traitor for merely being one? Said Palmer, with utter disgust for the way of things. What madness has taken this country? The boys from St. Omer had often talked of how uncomfortable they were in England, where they were unaccepted and unacceptable. In Flanders, as Roman Catholics, they were accustomed to thinking of themselves as numbering amongst the most fortunate of people, feeling safe walking through the streets, being respected and envied their calling to God. Will it be here in the city? I asked, sickened such devout holy man as he could die in such a way. It was hard to understand how God could allow such terrible dealings to his best followers. Yet he let his own son die in innocence, and his son's death reminded every Christian of his own morals. But Jesus returned to life. Those falsely hanged for treason would not. No, he's to be taken back to his home in Wales. His only reason for being here is so those lying Gauls might force him to name others. Has he done so? This was Master Cox, who oft stayed silent, and who had been so until now. Word in the court was that they have tried many ways to coerce him to fabricate lies and corroborate the ones they tell. But he has stayed true. His conscience is clear. No deaths will ensue from his mouth. More than one of us released a sigh, relieved his death would not be the cause of others, as was often the way with the weak, unscrupulous, or those that lost their way. But those who broke could not be wholly blamed, when the instruments used against them were as wicked as any in Spain or in the rest of Europe. None that lived in the prisons believed any proclamation by the king or government that our three kingdoms were free of such atrocities. It was common knowledge there that daily torment and afflictions were used to coerce young Catholic men and women to name enemies, friends and neighbours, no matter how often denied. Indeed, whenever I was apt to blame France for his earlier outrageous lies against his fellow men, my thoughts were strangled by memories of his screams. How could I judge such a one when I had not been tested myself? But still I did. I would not believe I would take the lives of others to save my own, nor, if I knew I was to die, could I take others to the death with me. I prayed I would never be tested. 2 months ago, after I came from Mr. Corral's house and revealed my scheme to Pierre, he forbade me to discover and reveal the wickedness and sin that occurred in the prisons to the king, and warned me against meddling in such things that were naught to do with me. He was fast in his opinion, and would not be swayed by my deep feeling on it, and so I did not tell him of the inquiries I made, nor of the records I kept, though I abhorred to keep any secret from Pierre. The task had been set in my way by the Lord, and I should not fall short on it. Master Palmer then gulped and wept openly. I talked to him. He is the best of men, too good for this travesty. His trial and the false convictions cannot be overturned, but the truth should be known by every man in this city. He did nothing, I say, to harm a single person, but has only done honest deeds to save those who needed help. They say he never turned a body away that wanted for food or bed to sleep on, and he travelled by night to give alms to the poor. I must tell the truth of this. I did not tell him he must write the truth to prick the conscience. I did tell him he must write the truth to prick the conscience of the wicked, but he said the wicked are the ones that would not read the truth, and nor would they recognise it if they did. None spoke while young Palmer talked, but questions clawed for answers. No doubt he is right, said Master Cox. Who are these deceitful witnesses that brought him to trial? I have a desire to look them in the eye as they watch him die, and if they are unrepentant, I would gladly do unto them what is so casually done to such an innocent man walking around, and beat sense into them. Master Cox, said Pierre, I understand your wish, for I have had it also. Madame Cellier was beaten near to death a year or so since, and in that madness that followed her treatment, I could easily let myself take the lives of the whole family, the man, the woman, and their children. If Lizzie herself had not reminded me we are all God's children, and they know not what they did, any more than those who crucified Jesus. They only follow the ways taught to them by their society. As Pierre spoke, I regretted my forgiveness of a year ago. I had thought myself a good woman then, but the continuing deaths might have stopped if some brave soul had stood against those men and told the truth ere now. Nobody spoke, so Pierre continued. We must not blame the ignorant for their ignorance. They know not how wrong they are, any more than those who carry out terrible deeds in the name of our church in Spain. This cannot excuse deliberate falsehoods. Only can it provide the scenery in which they concoct their deceits. It matters not whether a person is born here or there. Fear runs as deep throughout all countries. But there it be in Protestants, where here it be in Catholics. Pierre paused in thought. We are all victims of our birth, where we are born. Cox still bunched his fists, and I expected him to bring them down hard on the table. Perhaps it was only that such actions, such violence, Perhaps it was only that such action would violate the protected space formed by Master Townley's elbows on the table, and Townley's face looked deep into it, that stopped him. Those false witnesses had a grudge against him, Townley burst out. They even admitted the man had sworn to make Father Lewis repent. His wife had sworn to wash her hands in his heart's blood and make a pottage of his head. He mimicked her with derision, all because they would not extract money from him. Or could not extract money from him. What sort of malicious monsters are these that would take his life for a few pennies? Do they have a name, these monsters? Asked Pierre. James. They were William and Dorothy James. Townley's face, like that of Cox, was red, and within the sadness, strong anger was barely kept in check. As has happened more than once, every witness for the priest was spirited away before they could testify. 'Tis reprehensible. Were there none, then, to support him? The idea of no person to stand by him was appalling. The trial was designed to see Father Lewis fail. Townley spat the answer. He still supported his heavy head, with fingers curling and uncurling in his hair. Yes, the ones who revealed the grudge of the James pair stood up, but when one who had previously spoken against him was called upon to speak for him, he had already disappeared, before he was called. The youth took his hands from his hair and laid his palms on the table, his eyes now shining and staring at something we could not see. In his favour were 2 witnesses that bravely unmasked the prosecution witness, a man called Price. They swore he had declared not to recognise the father when he left the cell where Lewis was kept, yet in the court identified him as the priest and spoke out against him. Their testimony did no good for him, for the jury did not care for it. The rest of our questions stayed quiet. Townley looked around the table at each of us, his eyes wide, his face wet and hardened. And the worst of it all? If there were no doubts his trial was fair, from what I have said here, this one fact reveals its travesty. The man, Arnold, that was his chief prosecutor, chose the jury himself. What do you think of that? Is this true? Having stayed silent as in shock, Palmer ejaculated as though he could hold it in no longer. What mockery is this? 'Tis as true as I sit here at the table, said Townley. Then he has not had a jury of his peers, and that cannot be. Cox scraped back his chair and stood. We cannot let this be. We must stop his execution and demand a fair trial. The boys added to each other's outrage and became more and more vengeful. I had to admit, I too wanted to see this wrong righted. I too wanted vengeance. But when they started towards the door, I had to join Pierre and protest they should wait till the morrow. They should plan how they wished to achieve their end before finishing the day in some noose. It galled them, I could see that. It galled me also, and no doubt Pierre, but we would likely be thrown in the prison right up along with Father Lewis were we to arrive there in anger and protest wildly at his immoral trial and prosecution. We must plan our protest. Brother, heed me. Do not go now. You will not make our mark. You will not make your mark. Father Lewis will still be in prison, and you will lie there with him, I said. We must design a better way to stop these lies and this persecution. Too many not in jail for another's false tale, whether by willing or not, and more will follow. Cannot we change the course of this atrocity ourselves? Cannot we find a way to turn the tables? I had not known what I would say before it hung in the air, but once said, the truth and rightness of my idea gave me a peace I had not known before. In this, what I sought was a reversal of the tide, or was it vengeance? I could not tell, but I knew I could not stand by one more day without doing a little thing. I could see from their faces the others agreed. When they returned to the table, we talked through the night, until some time before the cock crowed, long after Pierre had found his pillow. He slept heavy, worn from protesting against our lack of wisdom, though his protest be half-hearted. He was with us on this, even if he did not desire it. As well as finding proof of the bad things that happen in jail, we would find proof that the Catholic plot against the king was a sham, and that men had died and more men suffered for the lies of false witnesses. We would find that proof and empty the jails of innocent men if it meant placing ourselves at risk. That night we agreed that we would take advantage of connections I made through my profession, as well as my capability of visiting Newgate, to further our cause. I was stirred by a tingling sensation at the thought I was to be entrusted with such vital tasks, and I trembled that I might do something more valuable than merely feeding poor prisoners. Perhaps I might free them. Perhaps I might save their lives. In the dawn light, I found my place next to Pierre, but I could not close my eyes. Even though they were open, I did not see the ceiling, but so many designs and plans we had made this night. Despite all that went on before them, as my eyes closed, I remembered that I was invited to St. James's Palace this very morning. I would not have long to sleep, but my profession gave me many waking nights, and I was used to taking up my sleep where I could find it. Margaret would wake me in good time to ready myself for the meeting with the Duchess.